Hey guys, welcome back to part 3 of this 4-part series now. Ironically enough, there's too much content to cover in this video to make it 3 parts, and potentially not even enough for the next part, so we might actually make this a 5-part series, but that's besides the point. Let's get to what we will be covering in this episode. In this episode, we will be talking about how to set up around different styles of players, such as your Awper or an aggressive rifler. We will also be talking about different styles of play, such as being an aggressive team or a more slow, methodical, passive team. We will also be talking about how to break down the game into smaller pieces or chunks that you can then process and use to get a better idea of how you want to structure your team. And finally, we'll be talking about everything utility and all the ways that you can utilize your utility properly. The most important role in the team outside of IGL and currently in today's meta is the Awper, so let's talk about how to build around him first. The two primary styles of Awpers are your aggressive Awpers and your passive Awpers. First, let's talk about passive Awping. Passive Awpers primarily focus on utility usage and holding angles to allow for rifles to be more aggressive. For example, something that a passive Awper might do is flash banana and then run up and post up on top car. This allows for the rifles that are in banana to have a lot more freedom and space to move around, because if anybody peeks them from the car, the Awper will kill them. Passive Awpers also give you a lot of options for your setups on the CT side. For example, in this round we're going to have a device going up ramp. This is not a typical starting position for an Awper, however, what this is going to allow his teammates to do is be more aggressive outside in a 2-man setup, because device has ramp on lockdown. Device is also able to rotate down to lower at one point in the round, and then lock down lower so there's no need for any of the A players to be rotating down. Like I said, because Device is able to pick up ramp and hold one position on the map by himself, it allows for Rez and Hampus to be double aggressive outside, trying to deny these red smokes. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the aggressive Awper. The aggressive Awper will often act as an entry fragger and have rifles support and follow him into bomb sites. As an example, Acorn in this run is going to jump up on top of Garage and try and pick an outside player. This is a very risky play, especially once he sees the outside smokes, because he's going to try and molly and still go for this pick. Awpers like this will often be a bit more inconsistent, because they are taking a lot more risks for the opening kills that they are going for. However, Awpers like this can also be incredibly explosive, for instance such as Simple, who will have insane stats if they just don't miss any shots. Aggressive Awpers can also be accommodated by aggressive riflers, because the aggressive Awper will take the primary focus and allow the aggressive rifle to have more space. So which style of Awping is better? Realistically speaking, the passive Awper will basically hard counter an aggressive Awper, because if an aggressive Awper goes for a pick onto an angle that the passive Awper is holding, the passive Awper should win that most of the time. This can be seen in an example of Acore versus Device on Nuke battling out at Squeaky Door. Acore, who could be considered the worst Awper between the two, actually wins the fight because he gets on the angle first and is considered the passive Awper in this example. Because Acore is on the angle first and Device is peeking into him as the aggressor, Acore is going to win the duel and kill Device. Device, as the aggressor, is at a massive disadvantage peeking into the Awper, which is why I think passive Awping is superior over aggressive Awping. If the aggressive Awper is peeking into a rifle though, then the aggressive Awper would have won the duel, and this is where aggressive Awping can be very impactful. However, with the importance of Awping in today's meta, it's probably a good idea to have your Awper be able to be both passive and aggressive. I recommend by having your Awper start out as a passive supportive Awper, because it's more consistent and you can build around your rifles early on and get them more comfortable. Then I recommend you start to implement more aggressive things for your Awper so he can have more impact in the team. To build around an aggressive Awper, you actually don't need to do that many things. An aggressive Awper is able to be self-sufficient for the most part, because he's going to make plays and picks based off of his feel for the game. On the other hand, you want to incorporate a passive Awper into your system based off of what your riflers are doing. For instance, if your riflers are taking banana, you want your Awper to be there to support them and to lock down angles that they might struggle with if an Awper were to peek them aggressively. Now let's talk about how to build around your aggressive riflers. Your aggressive riflers are going to be your huge X-Factor players that are going to create a lot of space for you, find opening kills, and find gaps in the defense. However, the aggressive rifler will also cost you a lot of openers and create gaps in your own play. You might have heard the verbiage, getting caught with a hand in a cookie jar, and the aggressive rifler is the prime example of that. Let's use the modern day prime example of an aggressive rifle, which is Yekindar. The misconception about Yekindar's play is that Yekindar is constantly going to be aggressing into you and trying to find opening kills. That isn't necessarily the case, and as you can see, Yekindar even waits for smokes and gets into position safely. However, in the mid-round, Yekindar is not afraid about taking space and not afraid to set on angles that could be unfavorable to him. If an Awper were to peek window with a flash onto Yekindar's angle, he would be in a pretty bad spot and the Awper would more than likely win. As you can see, Yekindar gets a nice spam kill on Alexi B because he's a bit more aggressive in holding this angle. However, it could also result in him getting picked by an Awper, and that's something that you take when you have an aggressive rifler. He will take more risky angles and do more risky things. Now we see how aggressive riflers actually play. Even though VP is in a 5v3 man advantage, you can see that Yekindar is taking space on middle by walking up catwalk and trying to look for duels. This could backfire even more if he were to die and put VP into a 4v3 advantage instead of a 5v3 advantage. However, in this round, Yekindar is able to get all the way up in the ladder room while his teammates are trying to contact A. As you'll see here, the A players aren't going to win the opening duels, but because of the space that Yekindar has created on catwalk, it allows VP to go back to B. As you can see here, James is rotating through spawn with the bomb. Buster's already out on B because Yekindar probably heard a rotate to A. Aggressive riflers can also act as your entry fraggers. As you can see here, Yekindar is going to be leading the pack going up connector, even though his tempo might not be what you'd ideally want as an IGL. As you can see, he's taking a pretty big risk to go through smokes here instead of waiting for support utility to help him. This could be a blessing and it could also be a curse, it just depends on what the CT side is doing. Yekindar easily could have died pushing through both of those smokes there, top con and jungle, but obviously he doesn't, which gives him more space to work with. So the main thing that you want to remember with aggressive riflers is that they are going to play for more. They're going to try and get extra space, extra map control, and look for extra kills that other players that are playing textbook might not. As you can see, Kicker gets 2 opening kills at A, and Yekindar's initial reaction is to try and get the gap window. This is a pretty risky play because if anybody's holding for him, Yekindar easily could have died and put the team in a 4v3 instead of a 5v3 advantage. So what you want to remember with aggressive riflers is being able to play up and down advantages. What I mean by this is you want to teach the aggressive rifler when to go for the cookie instead of just accepting him going for the cookie jar over and over again. If he gets caught with his hand in the cookie jar too many times, he will likely lose you the game, and then as the X factor, he is being a detriment. If he finds all the correct gaps, then he will immediately win you the game and you're going to win huge. Teaching your aggressive rifler when to go for the cookie or when to not go for the cookie is going to put you in more positive advantages than negative advantages. However, what you want to do with the rest of the team is teach them a lot about how to play from 4v5 man disadvantages because the entry fragger is eventually going to pick the wrong cookie. If you're incredibly good at winning these 4v5 situations, for instance Furia, you will still be able to be a very successful team despite the aggressive disadvantages the riflers will put you in. Now let's talk about our own playstyle as an IGL. Do we want to be an entry IGL or a lurk IGL? An entry IGL will typically entry for the team and call within a pack. For instance, the pack being where the majority of the players are, such as taking mid control on Mirage. A lurk IGL will be calling from the extremity, for instance calling from outside on nuke if you're doing an inner default. The main difference to note between the two is that an entry IGL will typically call around the players around him and coordinate what's happening based off of what he's seeing. A lurk IGL will call based off of what his players are telling him and what he is seeing on the outside extremity parts of the map, and make predictions based off of the information he gets from these anchors or extremity players. Nafany is a prime example of how an entry IGL will play. He will play aggressive and try to find opening kills and gaps for his team, which then allow him to make the decisions based off of the information he receives going for these plays. As you can see here, he will walk through smokes and try and find opening kills. He will also create a lot of space and take space away from the CTs despite the fact that it's risky and he might die. This is because with the space that he creates and the information he gets creating the space, he can mid-round and decide what the team will do from there. Blame F would lurk away from the team, however, where his players would go inner, he would go outer, and he will get his information based off of what the extremities are doing and make predictions based off of that. For instance, as you can see here, he is aggressive outside, his teammates are back towards spawn, and they're about to throw smokes to support him to try and make a play. On these smokes, Blame F will get a kill, and will then mid-round for his team to do something specific, such as go inside. As you can see, they're heading towards ramp now. So which style is better? In theory, the entry style is better because it lets you to call based off what you're seeing, and you are taking the primary parts of the map. As an extremity or in a lurk IGL, you probably won't be able to see what is happening in front of you and will have to rely heavily on your teammates' communication. However, if your players are comfortable taking map control together and you're comfortable lurking, I don't think it's a hindrance as the IGL to be a lurker. This primarily comes down to the communication of your players, the comfort of your players, and the comfort of you as an IGL, so you need to talk with your team and figure out which style of IGL you would be able to do. If you are comfortable doing both, then you can build your team in either way, whether you be the entry or the lurk. But how do you combine these different styles of players into one team? If you have an aggressive Awper in a team, you want to be an entry IGL, and you have an aggressive rifler, I recommend that you play a more aggressive style of play. For instance, Na'Vi or Fury are good examples of this. Na'Vi, more of a heavy default team that will find a lot of opening kills and create space off of their aggressive players, and Fury, more of a team that has a lot of good early round executes. I recommend you build around the aggressive style instead of the methodical or contact style of team, because your players will get a lot more antsy and will be able to play based off their utility, their communication, which you need to be an effective methodical style team, and they won't be able to pause as well as a contact style team such as Gambit, who will pause mid-execute. If you want to play a more slow style that is methodical, where you use your utility to force players back, and then you slowly but surely take map control from them using this utility, using your flashes, then I recommend you play a more methodical style of play, where you essentially do just that. Use your utility to take map control, and then you slowly work your way up to the bomb sites and execute onto them. Methodical styles of play typically also play a lot of mind games. For instance, Astralis, you have Glaive, who's been a mastermind of CSGO for the past 3-4 years, and Heroic, who was manipulating just about every team in the scene last year and even some this year, and they've done some amazing things with just creating mind games. For the methodical style of play, it would be better for you to have more passive players. You can still be the entry IGL, you can still have an aggressive rifle and play methodical, because you still need somebody that creates openings for you. Eventually you have to kill people in CSGO, there's no way around that. However, in general, you want to have more passive players that are able to wait and use utility effectively. Finally, we have a contact style of team, and this is kind of a new style that is being revolutionized by Gambit, where essentially they will use their utility early on in their default, kind of in the methodical style, to force people back. However, they will contact into a lot of areas silently instead of using utility to take them. For instance, Top Car and Banana, they'll use their smoke Top Car to block any sort of early CT aggression, and then they'll just walk into Top Car. Or Overpass, for instance, they'll flash off any sort of aggression towards Fountain, and then they'll walk all the way up to bathrooms, for instance. This allows them to save a lot of utility against teams that want to play more passive. For instance, on Overpass, if teams just want to play it from the A site, Gambit aren't using that much utility to actually take bathroom and stuff like that. They've just walked in, so they've had a lot more utility saved so they can execute. And on these executes, they recognize that teams will be playing passive against them, so they just pause mid-execute, which is something very specific to Gambit, and is actually really fascinating to watch. If you want to see it real time, I highly recommend you go watch Gambit demos on Overpass, because I think that is where it is most visible. The contact style of team requires the least as far as rules go. You can kind of make it work with whoever you have, but the contact style of team needs by far the most communication to work. Gambit has really refined communication. You can even hear Stico talk about how they have number coding for certain areas of the map that's really refined and precise. So Gambit's communication is on a league above most people, which is why I highly recommend sticking away from the contact style of play. Now, if you want to be a top-level team or a professional team, you will also need to be able to play multiple styles. No matter if your players are aggressive or passive, they need to be able to play both if you want to be a top contending team. This is because one of the most important things that you can do at pro play is to change the pace. Changing the pace essentially means you're changing the style of your play. For example, if you are a methodical type team, you default in a slow way using your utility to slowly force your way into map control. A good change up would be having a fast round where you take bracket control super early, or you do something that is really fast like an early execute. This can catch teams off guard because they're expecting you and adapting to your slower style of play, and now you're catching them off with something that's really fast. You also want to be able to change the pace mid-round. For instance, if you start out a round going really fast, you took early bracket control, you then might want to slow the round down, give up the control, and just go quiet for a while. This causes a lot of paranoia in the enemy team because you just took so much space from them really early, and now they have no idea where you've gone. The key point for changing the pace is to make sure that you are staying unpredictable. Being predictable is the worst thing in CSGO because then they can always be prepared for what you're going to do. If you are a team that's able to change the pace constantly, you can make counters to the adjustments the teams are doing. Just as an example, if you are a highly aggressive team that take map control really fast, but the team has now adapted and is throwing so much utility that anytime you go for map control, you get hit down to like 30 health, then you might want to change to being a methodical style for the rest of the game, or until they stop using their utility so early on. So one way that you can help with changing the pace is to break the game down into 3 separate phases. For instance, the first phase of the game, or the first phase of the round, is in the first 30 seconds where you're setting up. Then you get into the map control phase, which is about the middle minute of the round, and then you have the end round phase, which is the last 30 seconds. This can be really helpful in identifying which style you want to go with. For instance, an aggressive style will typically hit in the first 30 seconds or in the earlier stage of phase 2. However, a more methodical team will typically execute in the later stages, such as phase 3 or the end of phase 2, in that sort of time frame. If you notice that the team is playing a certain way in one of these phases, you might want to change the pace to adapt to what they're doing. For instance, if they're saving a lot of utility early round, so you can't execute late, like in a methodical style where you want to end in phase 3 but they still have utility left over, you might switch over into phase 1 and go for a more aggressive play to take map control. If they are dumping utility early, you do the reverse, and instead of going for early map control in phase 1, you play it slower and go for executes in phase 3. These phases can also be utilized in your default. For instance, if you see here, for the setup phase, there's 3 main things that you want to accomplish. You want to have your early round call, so if you're going for something early like an early round rush or an early round map take, you have that called already. You want to counter early CT aggression, such as an Awper going for a pick or them going for fast map control, such as a banana take or something, and you want to also get to map control that you should be given. Remember, defaulting is primarily based off your map control, so you want to make sure the map control that you are supposed to have, you obtain. The mid-round map phase has by far the longest time, so you have by far the most things to do. In the mid-round, or map control phase as I call it, you are taking control that the CTs get at the start while also baiting their utility. For instance, getting control of banana, technically the CTs get there first, or they get there about the same time as you, so you have to fight for this area with your utility and your guns. Then you need to take top car, which is dominated by the CT side, so you need to get to that map control, which is stealing CT map control. While doing this, you also want to bait out utility from the B players, so you can then end B. You also need to think about how teams will reaggress to get map control that you've stolen, such as if you start out taking bracket, then go back to banana to get control of it, then you have to expect for them to reaggress into bracket and take control back. You also need to start to formulate an end round plan here as the IGL and start to think about where you want to end. So if you want to end B, you need to start to figure that out about now and start planning on how to end B, for instance, manipulating players. If you want to manipulate players, what you can do is you can give them full banana control, say, okay, that's fine, and they're going to rotate a 4th player to A because that's kind of a common thing to do. So what we're going to do is we are going to go back to banana at about 45 seconds, and we are going to rush B right off the back of that. That's just one example of manipulating players. Another would be, for instance, pulling the arch player towards library or deep arch, making it seem like you're doing a B wrap, and then going up lane so he's not able to help the A players on an A execute. Finally, we have the end round phase, which is by far the most set in stone phase that you're going to have. Basically, you need to group and you need to exec. You have to get on a bomb site by this point, otherwise you lose due to time. You also want to establish good after plans, otherwise teams will be able to retake after you get the bomb down. It's also a very good idea to start to understand phases of the game. Essentially, phases of the game is talking about how the game evolves over time. Early on in the game, you're both going to be playing your own game. You're going to be playing the game plans that you developed for each other and seeing if your game plan is going to work or not. Once you figure out it doesn't work, you then shift into the countering stage where you go back and forth playing chess, essentially. What you're trying to do is you're trying to one-up the other IGL and figure out a way to break the original game plan that they had, because inevitably one game plan is going to work while the other one didn't. Once you get through this phase, you will then get to the final phase. The final phase being really just adaptation. Eventually, at some point, you're both going to reach the phase where you start playing mind games, and you just have to go back and forth adapting to each other. It's important to recognize that these phases of the game exist, because if you don't and you stick to only playing your playstyle, what's going to happen is you're commonly going to start out games really strong, and then you're going to fail to adapt to what the other team is doing, and you're going to start losing rounds. Once you start losing rounds and they start making that comeback on you, it's going to affect your mentality. You're going to get more depressed because you're like, why isn't this working? So understanding that you need to change your philosophy and shift because the phase of the game has shifted is going to help you dramatically with keeping a good mentality and figuring out how to resolve these issues mid-game. Finally, let's talk about one of the most important aspects of the game, understanding time. Time is a huge part of CSGO, and if you don't understand the small timings and the small bits of time in the game, you will constantly be playing at a disadvantage. Let's think about the things that time affect in CSGO. Grenades. How long does it take for a smoke to pop? How long does it take for a flash to go? How long does it take for your Molotov to land and stay spreading? How much time can you stop and delay with these nades? How much time is it going to take you to get into a setup? How much time is it going to take for your players to rotate? Or how much time is it going to take for the other team to rotate? Because if you rotate faster than them, you can beat them into certain areas on a rotate, right? You need to think about how long you can manipulate players for. For instance, if you smoke off a certain area, how long do you think the player will be caught off guard by your fake? How long do you need for the execute and timings on your execute? What timings are your players going to be going in on? What time is this flash popping in comparison to the smokes that you're throwing? Use time to your favor. Time is so important in CSGO that I literally cannot stress it enough. This also includes the CT side. Time is super important because if you win, or you can win, by just playing time. You don't have to kill a single T player and you can still win the round. This will be talked about a lot more in my next video when I go over utility, but time and slowing people and using your nades effectively to delay and give yourself time to do things is so fucking important. So some key things that you want to think about when you're talking about time. First, you want to think about how long it takes you to get set up for something compared to how long it takes for a team to rotate into an area. For instance, how long does it take your B exec to hit before it takes for their A rotator to rotate to B? If your B exec is so slow that the A player can get there in time, the timing of your exec is bad, especially in like a late round situation. So you really want to think about how fast you need to be going, and again, the pace or the speed of the things you're doing. Pacing and speed also involves time, which is why I break down the phases into set time segments. Because understanding the time of when you need to be adjusting what you're doing in a round is so important. You also want to understand the time of your utility. For instance, if you're throwing certain nades, how long does it take for these nades to pop? A frontside smoke, how long does it take for the frontside smoke on front of the pop to block vision? How long does it take for the flash to bloom so you can peek with it? These are all little micro timings that you need to understand in the game. You also want to understand the timing of when people can be peeking you. For instance, on a re-aggression, if you have arch smoke up and you think that they're going to re-aggress into you, you know, okay, they'll be re-aggressing about the time the smoke is fading. I need to expect a peek from a player at about 1 minute or whatever. You get the idea. You need to be able to picture these small little time windows in your head because that will dictate how you play as a player and it will dictate how you call as a caller way more than you really realize. So time is so important. Please start to understand time. With that being said, that's going to be the end of the video for part 3. I will be making a part 4 and a part 5, and yes, utility will come in part 4. I'm sorry I pushed it off, and I'm sorry that I'm too lazy to go back and fix the intro. It is what it is. Essentially, I've resorted to making shorter videos, but we'll be making more of them, so they're more digestible for you as the viewer. And other news, and some is probably more important news, as of Thursday, I've been officially able to announce that I will be joining Fun Plus Phoenix as a CSGO analyst. It's been a blast working with everybody there. I already love everybody. Madden, Farlig, Zen, Stico. Emmy, Devil Walk. I love all my teammates already. It's been so much fun. If you want to go check out the announcement tweet, or if you want to follow me on Twitch because we are in the player break, I'll be streaming a lot more, then make sure you go follow both of those. They'll be linked in the description below. And if you want to pick my brain, make sure you're checking out my streams because again, I'll be streaming a lot this month. Anyways, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to both me and Nart, and I will see you guys next time.